all over the world, and so we're hoping to use the website as an archive. So if this is important to you and your work, please check out our website because we have incentives and stuff as a fundraiser, and this is what our subscription card looks like. So my name is Sharmeen, and I am an organizer with No One Is Illegal. Just pick up a card. It's up in the anti.org. Yeah, and if you want to write. We publish almost anything. So I organized with Known as Legal, and I joined them around 4 years ago during a really hard time for both migrants and refugees in Canada when the conservative government was in power. And just to be clear that it is still really hard for immigrants, migrants, and refugees in Canada right now, even under the Liberal government. And I'll kind of go over the Canadian context with the struggles with migrants and refugees as in the current context and what we've been working on, and kind of the limitations right now around people's understanding of things like the Safe Third Country Agreement, and I'll explain what that is in terms of how that impacts refugees. But like the previous speaker was talking about, is that migration has always been part of different human journeys, and it's also to look at migration historically. You can also see how the role of capitalism and also class privilege fits into migration. So the question of choice, how people choose to migrate or how they are forced, is often based on their class location as well as the country they're coming from, meaning what particular race or gender they are in. And we can currently see huge divisions around this question of migration and choice when it comes to race and gender with current Canadian policies, especially if you look at programs within Canada, such as the Temporary Foreign Worker Program or the Seasonal Agricultural Worker Program, which mostly exploits heavily workers of color from the third world, as well as mostly women, especially with the live-in or with the child care or the caregiving program. I apologize, a lot of these programs have changed like year to year, and they change the names, so sometimes I have to like update my own terms in my head. So I think when we're talking about migration and we're talking about the move of workers mostly to fill in labor shortages around the world, it's really important for me, especially for one to have like an internationalist analysis about migration, to think about the specific location where they're from, and also and how particular countries such as Canada, the United States, and also countries in Europe have been controlling the movement of migrants within their borders. And since people talk about often that we're now facing the largest refugee crisis since World War II, the biggest difference though is that...
Okay.
Oh.
Got the connection, continue.
They're back, okay. The biggest difference though now is that we have seen an intense development of security and cementation of borders since World War II. Even like if you compare to talk to people about migration in the 70s, very different policies. I mean, there was hardly any kind of border controls, even in the 70s. And so if you look at the development of border security, even in the last 2 decades, you have seen billions of dollars poured into the building security around the borders. A lot of this is like based on different developments. We could talk about the war on drugs, which I'm sure that our comrade from Mexico might touch on. Also the threat of terrorism. But for Canada, the major difference is that in the 1960s, they actually had like race-based migration rules. Basically, if you were brown, you really couldn't get status, and realizing this was a human rights violation, they changed it to a point system. The point system is still incredibly racist, but it's still, portrayed as this very neutral way to only have the best of the best enter Canada, the best of the best get status, and it's still an incredibly class-based point system. In that, basically, if you're basically a millionaire, you can get permanent status upon arrival. While they won't say that this is a racist point system, it is clearly clearly racist and also clearly based on class division. So I think really understanding the developments of border control over the last few decades is really important. We're trying to grapple with the refugee crisis because the refugee crisis that happened during World War II, the sort of material realities of the borders just aren't the same. And the way that our borders are constructed now are completely different. They're highly militarized, more so, like obviously more so in the United States and becoming more so in Europe. And I think that understanding these border controls in relation to international capital and in relation to how international capital operates is really important. I think it's also really important to acknowledge that a lot of these people escaping their countries and going into Europe is not only just the largest refugee crisis, but it's also the largest form of direct action that we've probably seen in our lifetime. These people, often people, leaders of countries will say, these people are breaking laws. You know, they're cute jumpers, they're just like entering their countries without proper process. And what I call that is direct action. When you're willing to break the law in order to achieve, safety, this is a form of direct action. And so we are known as illegal. Our motto is that we support the movement of people. Our motto is basically that we support people to leave, to return, or to stay. And we do this also with the acknowledgement that we're organizing on colonized land, and that we need to build relationships with the traditional people of this land and make those links of migration and colonization, because they're often very linked, especially migration into Canada, especially under the Temporary Foreign Worker Program and the other programs that bring in the labor but don't give people the status. So what has been going on with Canada right now since, in terms of the refugee crisis, and I'll be talking about two main things. Since the election of Trump, there's been a huge sort of bubbling of like, what is Canada's role with accepting refugees? And there's kind of been this like myth that like, you know, Justin Trudeau put out a tweet saying that anyone was welcome in Canada. And what was really frustrating is that, and I just did a whole bunch of international travel for my research, and there's this perception that Canada is very opening and welcoming to refugees, and it really plays into this like really false narrative of Canadian nationalism. Like the Canadian Liberals have inherited a refugee and immigration system that was completely gutted by the Conservatives, but they've done very little to change it. So right now, one of the biggest things that people are talking about is a safe third country agreement that Canada has between the United States. What this agreement is any refugee that enters the United States but wants to go into Canada has to apply for refugee status in the United States. And the reason that so many now, we've had around 3,500 people try and cross the border, not through the port, but like overland, different ways to enter Canada. The reason that this has risen is because of the fear around backlash against refugees in the United States. So people have really taken up the cause of ending this agreement. It is something that we support. We do think that, especially in the wintertime, when refugees are, because basically if you're a refugee and you go to official border crossing, they will turn you back right there. So the only way you can really enter Canada is if you just go around it. So that's why you hear these stories of refugees kind of crossing the fields in Manitoba in minus 30 weather, and then calling the RCMP. Now, most of these refugees are detained, and they are probably, most of them have been sent back, except for a few cases. But not all of it is because of this agreement. What I want everyone to know is that even if we got rid of this agreement, most of those people coming here for refugee status would be denied, because our criteria for what is a refugee is a very, very high criteria. First, Canada only really accepts refugees if they are deemed as a refugee by the UN system. To be a UN certified refugee is a 2-year process and limits a lot of people. Basically, if you have any form of political affiliation, or if you're a part of any sort of political movement that took up arms or was defending yourself, you would be excluded from getting refugee status in the UN. So basically, any sort of activists or revolutionaries are excluded from refugee status. This is a big difference from the 70s. This is a very new thing. Because in the 70s we actually saw a lot of Chilean revolutionaries being able to come to Canada. This is not the case anymore. And if you're a refugee who makes a claim on land, that is, if you arrive to Canada and say, I'm a refugee, your the rate of acceptance of those folks is 2%. So the majority of them are deemed as not being a refugee. Most of those people go undocumented within Canada, and that's also part of our other campaign is dealing with undocumented people within Canada. Majority of people undocumented in Canada are the failed refugee claimants or work permits that have expired and they have no status. But the resources that the CBSA puts into is mostly getting those failed refugee claimants out because they see them as bogus refugee claims. So the majority of resources going to doing mass deportations, harassing people, going to people's schools to find their children. Most of them are failed refugee claimants. And if you're deported, you're not allowed back into Canada. You're just seen as like a liar, using the system to jump the queue and things like that.
2 minutes.
Oh, okay. I want to spend the last 2 minutes saying that it's really important to also see Canada's refugee policy in line with the temporary foreign worker program that we have in place. So we have several programs that allow workers in to work and then leave. And aside from the caregiver program, those workers have no avenue to get status. So I've worked with migrant workers who've been here for over 10 years on rotating contracts, and they can't use that experience ever to get status. There's no avenue for them. And so I think it's really important to see Canada's refugee policy and also internationally the migration of people with the rise of temporary foreign worker programs that are happening primarily in the first world. Primarily Australia, United States, and Canada, and how that impacts the migration of people. Basically, we're using people for their labor and not giving them status, and a lot of this is based on their class and race. So for Canada, there's actually a designation called low-wage work, meaning agricultural work, caregiving, construction. If you're in IT, you can actually get permanent status upon arrival. So there's major differences based on class. And so I think if we're going to have an international analysis about migration, we need to have an international analysis about borders and how those borders have been controlling the movement of working class people around the world and also criminalizing them. We've been putting people in jail here in Canada without charges, and we've had people in jail for over 10 years just because they're deemed as dangerous and not being able to deport them. And I think that how Canada also securitizes and criminalizes people around the border is an issue for working class people in Canada. And if we want to be internationalist, we need to include that in our analysis and think about what a world would look like without borders. So,
Thank you, sister. Okay, Jaime, we're going to come back to you now. So,
in a process that began hundreds of thousands of years ago and that has intensified during the last millenniums, humans have spread all over the world and have settled in all continents except Antarctica. And even there, research stations are maintained at great expense and at considerable risk. But there doesn't seem to be any shortage of volunteers who are willing to go there. To say that we are all descendants of migrants is an understatement. We are part of a biological species, one of whose most outstanding characteristics is migration. In other words, we are a highly mobile species. In light of this fact, we can ask ourselves, how is it possible for right-wing nationalists and right-wing political movements to entice and convince followers to outright repudiate migrants? We are all descendants of migrants. A series of myths on migrants have been created during the last years. The first of this is the big migrant scare there is this idea that so many migrants are pouring into Europe, the United States, and other parts of the developed world, that they will somehow endanger what we could call the Western civilization. Of course, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but this is the idea that people like Nigel Farage, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing his name, it's not intentional, showed with this giant poster he displayed just before the vote for breakfast with Brexit, showing all these thousands of migrants going into the European Union. This is the big scare. There are other myths as well. One of them, which has been peddled very energetically in the United States, that migrants harbor lots of criminals in their within them, and that a terrible criminality wave awaits the United States if this migrant wave will continue to happen. Well, first, on the number of migrants. Fortunately for us, the Nature magazine, which is probably the most respected, or I will state it outright, is the most respected scientific magazine, together with the American Association for the Advancement of Sciences, Science magazine, published a special issue on March 1st of this year, precisely with the topic on human migration. And there they analyze the numbers. What are the real numbers? I mean, let's put aside the myths. What are the real numbers on refugees? I'm going to quote, not extensively, but repeatedly from this issue. First quote: researchers warn that misleading reports about the magnitude of flows into Europe and the United States are creating unjustified fears about refugees. That is undermining efforts to manage the massive humanitarian problems faced by those fleeing Syria and other hotspots. Then, a little bit later in the same article, which is titled What the Numbers Say About Refugees. The number of refugees and migrants entering the European Union is low compared with the bloc's population. The total rate of migration has remained relatively stable over the past 50 years. The United Nations High Commissioner on Refugees estimates that there were 21.3 million refugees in 2015. That is only slightly high, and that's worldwide. That is only slightly higher than the 1992 figure of 20.6 million, when the global population was just 2/3 of today's. Then, can you confirm you're still hearing? Yep. You're still listening? Okay. I heard a little sound, but you're still listening. So I'll just continue. Okay. I can give an important indicator, which is mentioned in the Nature article, in which migration from Mexico to the U.S. reached high points during the 1990s and especially in 2007, and then began to fall substantially since the September 2008 economic crisis. The London-based The Economist has reinforced this conclusion in an April 18 article titled "The Big Hole in Trump's Wall." And I quote the subtitle of this article. New research suggests that illegal immigration from Mexico will continue to fall. They say literally. Literally in another article, they show figures where the inflow of migrants from Mexico has substantially reduced since that year 2008. In the end, even more illustrative, in my opinion, although of course complementary to what we have just said, contrary to the idea that migrants just come to somehow prey on industrially developed countries, there is the opinion on of the editors of the Nature magazine, and in another article in that same issue, they state clearly, when migrants can successfully settle in new countries, they often bring ideas, skills, and gritty determination to their homes. The United States has benefited greatly from foreign-born scientists and technologies. Until now, writes innovation researcher Vivek Vadva. He warns that the country's sluggish visa system is deterring many of the world's best technology entrepreneurs who have settled elsewhere instead. So the right-wing's ideas and misconceptions about migrants are damaging in many ways. Not only damaging to refugees who are desperate for help, but damaging the interests of their countries and their own economies as well. An editorial article published in the regular issue of the same publication of Nature, the regular issue of the same publication, that is Nature, on March 2, Counting People, stresses the point that they had made in their special issue. I'm going to quote from it. All involved should acknowledge that global migration statistics are a mess. For example, the headline, 710,000 migrants entered the EU in the first 9 months of 2015, blared from a press release that year by Frontex, the European Border and Coast Guard Agency in Warsaw. Not so, said social scientist Nando Sigona, an expert in refugees and migration at the University of Birmingham, the United Kingdom. Frontex, he pointed out, has been counting the same people 2 and 3 times or more. For example, a person who was reported on arrival in Greece and left the EU by going to Albania was again counted on re-entering the bloc by a different route. So these myths can be countered one by one with very solid data. There's another one, for example, which is the fact that Mexican migrants harbor a very important number of criminals within their ranks. I will not dispute the fact that every population, every migrant or a stable population harbors troubled elements within its ranks, and this is obviously true in the case of Mexico. But all the data that has been
Oh, he disconnected. What happened?
I didn't touch anything.
Well,
I just wanted to give him his 2-minute warning.
Hi there.
hi.
2 minutes.
2 minutes.
Okay. Okay. Should I continue?
Yes.
Okay. 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 Very good. Very good. I will just conclude. I don't think it will be necessary to spend too much time on the conclusion. The facts about migration are very, very different from the myths that the right wing is trying to push in order to further their political interests. And there is absolutely no wall. There are absolutely no extreme vettings that are going to stop migration. Migration will continue. What we have to do is to understand it and to see its potential. It's completely wrong to state that migrants, be them from Mexico, Central America, or wherever, are harboring a very large number of criminals among them. Of course, as I said before, every population has its own troubled elements, but the data put forward by the State Department, the Department of Justice and the FBI on criminality shows that migrants from Mexico and from Central America have a lower criminality rate than the one for the rest of the population. So,
hello, everybody. I'm Nikolas from Greece.
Can't hear.
In fact,
That's as loud as it's getting.
unfortunately was not able to hear anything since Jaime finished his speech. So I'm not so much in the debate, but still I can tell you some elements concentrated on the situation now we face now in Greece. So it's right that in a more historical prospect, human beings always have
Putting this mic closer
migrated.
to one.
All of us are refugees and
People
migrants.
can move up. People
But
can-
in a more strict, in a more strict time, we can also say that for centuries now, migrants have always tried to come to Europe or the West in general to find some better living conditions. So we have seen many waves after waves of poor people from Africa or Asia trying to cross the Mediterranean to reach Europe. And this is something that we are more concerned. This very sea has many times become a wet grave for hundreds and thousands of human beings. Or trying to cross the Turco-Greek borders, often falling victim to the illegal minefields that are still in place. What are the causes of these waves? There is one more more general cause, that is the chronic poverty of more than two-thirds of the planet, which suffer from imperialist and colonial exploitation over centuries. The so-called Western world, or the global North, in fact owes its prosperity to the misery of the global South. It is a general truth. So migration is a spontaneous answer of millions of people to this global injustice. But there is also one more immediate cause. The numerous war interventions from the strong imperialist countries, and only in the last decade, after the 9/11 and so on, decades of interventions by the US, the European Union countries, and others as well, like Russia now and Syria, they have taken place, decades of interventions, they have taken place in Africa, in North Africa, or in Middle East. These interventions have as a goal either to overthrow governments and install new, or to support the already regimes that are on the ground. And mainly we speak about dictators. and against popular uprising, depending on the special imperialist interests at any case. So, millions of people of lives are openly threatened, and refugees are just people fleeing from bombs, foreign troops, or ultra-reactionary religious group, as is the case of the ISIS now fighting in Iraq, in Syria, and in Lebanon. I insist in these 2 points for 2 reasons. The first reason is that there is a whole debate about the difference, the supposed difference between immigrants and refugees. For us and for socialists and revolutionaries, they are essentially the same thing, as the causes behind the migration and refugees waves are the same. And the effort to separate them in 2 different categories is in fact an effort of diversion from the real causes of migration. Furthermore, the fact that the status of the refugee is acknowledged only to people coming from specific countries. For instance, a person of Syrian origin that comes to Greece has, supposedly a chance to be granted asylum as a refugee, but someone coming from Afghanistan will not be at any case. So this means that rights, social rights, the asylum and so on, and some other rights that come with it, have to do with the origin of each person. So this is clearly, this is clearly racist. Second, there has been also a debate in Greece about how reactionary is the phenomenon of migration as a general phenomenon. This, of course, this argument, of course, is of far-right origin, that is refugees that are coming to overwhelm us. This is a very big lie, as Jaime described, but it's also used, or used to be used, by the left-wing people too, in a different, of course, way. There has been an argument that migration is has to do with people that come from countries that are well paid and so on. So they, migrants and refugees, can be used by the bosses to lower wages in the country of reception. For instance, this can be translated that Pakistanis or Afghan people can lower the wages for the Greek working people. For historical reasons, as also Jaime described, and for contemporary reason as well, migration is not a reactionary phenomenon, but it's very progressive in its very essence, as people that migrate, they come to correct a global injustice of they are trying to escape a certain prefixed destiny. So, of course, in the last years, this kind of refugee crisis is a largely constructed phenomenon. It's, of course, has taken dimensions that are not real, but still, the phenomenon has been aggravated since the Syrian war began in 2011, and above all, as we in Greece as concerned, as far as Greece is concerned, above all since 2015, and especially the summer of 2015 was the period when most refugees ever tried to enter Europe through the Mediterranean. We, as people living in Greece, have to do with the policies of both the European Union and the Greek government that are racist and against refugees and migrants. Since many years, the EU has put forward a series of policies that are codified as Fortress Europe. It is, on one hand, the Dublin treaties, which send refugees back to the countries of entrance, and this means for the majority of people, of more than 90%, these countries are Greece, Spain, and Italy. It is, of course, the above mentioned formation of the Frontex, which is a multinational police force, coast guard force, that patrols the sea and land borders of Europe, of the European Union, and is notorious for its actions. Various bilateral treaties with third countries, and the last one being the one signed along with Turkey. And Turkey, for this reason, has been described as a safe country. We all can see how safe now is Turkey under Erdogan, and for refugees. And the EU has approved a many billion high loan to this country, to our neighbors, to handle the refugee crisis themselves. That means imprison thousands of refugees, or maybe millions of refugees in concentration camps. And on one hand, the European Union tries to get rid of thousands of refugees this way, but on the other hand, Erdogan is playing this card as a blackmail to the EU, like if I can't take what I want from you, like political, economic, or other benefit, I can open the borders and like flood Europe with migrants. And it is a game played by two sides, of course, in a clear expense of millions of people. But as far as the Greek government are concerned, they have not been any better than this. The previous governments responded to the refugees waves with building a fence on the Turkish borders. This measure is not very original for American friend. And organizing concentration camps that are, that are called hotspots on various places, but certainly outside cities. So the Syriza government, despite its promises, didn't take any measures against that. On the contrary, it builds more concentration camps, it patrols the borders more strictly, and also the government, and through it, far-right Minister of National Defense, is more and more engaged in war scenarios and military developments, military activities in the region, which will mean that the next government will be, the current government will be responsible for more and more refugees as well. Now, hopefully the reaction of people to refugees was in general totally different than that. Of course, the Greek society was not immune to far-right propaganda, but still, the far-right, the neo-Nazis and the fascists of Golden Dawn and other organizations as well, they didn't succeed in organizing much action due to the fact also that they faced a strong that was strong before an anti-fascist movement in our cities and islands. So we could also say that the left forces, the left parties, and the social movement in general had a very mature reaction in all this situation. We did things that were not imaginable at all before. We organized a practical solidarity on very great scale. In fact, every neighborhood, every trade union on local and national level, every political party gathered food and other needed material and sent it to refugees. There have been a lot local and national demonstrations on favor of refugees' rights. And above all, I think that the most important for us is that for the first time in its sectarian history, the Greek left succeeded in organizing a joint manifestation along with many immigrants on the day of the immigrant, which is March 24th and 21st. So I will finish by saying that there are some very concrete political demands that we in Greece stand for, and that have a very, I think, very general character. They are very general character. universal character, which is the cancellation of every bilateral and European and national treaty restricting the right of migrants to move freely and refugees to move freely. The acknowledgement of full social and political rights for every person that wants to live in the country, and this means the right to vote, the right to make part in the trade unions, which the union bureaucracy denies, their access to public health and education, and the right of anyone to install where they want. We strongly encourage everybody to stay with us in Greece and fight together, but at any case, it's a choice that must be up to them. We are also against all kinds of imperialist interventions. We are against the participation of our country in the international imperialist organizations like the NATO and the EU. And I am closing by saying solidarity with refugees. Refugees are not only poor people looking for help. We see them as ourselves, as our parents, our children, our brothers, our colleagues, which is a very core element of our class in our struggle against the capitalist barbary. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Bye.
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 Adieu.
All right.
Okay, so at least we got to hear the two speakers, even though we can't, they can't listen to us now or the other speakers, or we can't ask them questions. But with further ado, we'll bring on Yasin, who's going to answer all the questions later.
Yes, first,
Get a microphone.
Yeah, here.
First, I'll explain the nature of the technological problem. So,
Okay, and then I'll start your 15 minutes
Okay.
once you finish with the explanation.
actually, we purchased or rented the whole equipment from UFT, including the wired internet connection. Actually, when you're donating money to us, some of that money goes to UFT for this equipment. But the wired connection didn't work, so we had to rely on wireless internet here, which had some problems of its own. Secondly, we used Skype software, which was downloaded on our computer for connection. It had some problems. I think it's a global problem with Skype at the moment, so it's beyond our control. Therefore, we had to rely on the web version of Skype, and hence we had similar technical issues. So we apologize for this, but it was beyond our control. UFT and Windows on Skype caused the problem. So without further ado, I will be speaking about the Syrian refugees in Turkey. First of all, let me remind you the title of a report published by the UN Refugee Agency. The title of that report that was published in 2014 was World at War. Comrades, sisters, brothers, indeed, the world is at war. And imperialists and their mad dogs, such as Turkey's Erdogan, are steering the world towards a world war. It is serious. We, as the working people of the world, have to stop these imperialists and their mad dogs from leading us to a world war. Thank you. My talk has two parts. First, I will be talking about the condition of Syrian refugees in Turkey. That section will end with some political demands we can support or raise. And secondly, I will be talking about the situation in the Middle East, which caused the flux of Syrian refugees to Turkey and to Europe, even to North America. First, let me start with some numbers. These are coming from the UN Refugee Agency. There are 5 million registered Syrian refugees now, 5 million.
Wow.
And 3 million of these are in Turkey. So currently in Turkey, there are 3 million Syrian refugees, and they all moved to Turkey since 2011. So in 5-6 years, Turkey received 3 million Syrian refugees. The population of Turkey is 80 million. So this is around 3.75% of the whole population. And only 9% of these are in refugee camps. The remainder, 91%, are across Turkey. And of those 3 million people, 708,000 of those are school-age children. 708,000. And in 2014-15 school year, only 200 of them were in school. Now the number is around half. So half of the more than 700,000 school children are at school. What about the rest? Well, I'll tell you now. They work mostly in the very poor conditions in factories which resemble the 18th, 19th century, Charles Dickens novels. And they work around 12-14 hours a day. That's coming from an official report. Children work for 12 hours a day. Occupational disease is skyrocketing among these children. And the former Minister of Family and Social Policies, that's the official formal name of the ministry, Family and Social Policies. Fatma Şahin, she used to be the minister, now she's the mayor of a big industrial city, Gaziantep. She said Syrian refugees were like a medicine for the Turkish employers. She meant low-cost, informal Syrian labor was a big medicine, a remedy for the struggling Turkish capitalists. That's how they see the Syrian refugees, folks. They suffer, the Syrian refugees, but in the eyes of the capitalists, they're just labor. Shame on them. And as a result, as a response to increasing informal labor in Turkey, the government passed a law. Currently, all registered Syrian refugees are allowed to receive work permits, so they can get work permits as of January 15, 2016. So in the last year, they allowed to take them to get work permits, hence get into the formal, job market. But only 0.1% of these Syrians, 0.1%, 1 in 1,000 of them, were allowed to get work permits, and only 0.1% of them were able to get formal sector jobs. Why? Because the Turkish employers prefer Turkish workers. They see the Syrian refugees as, I don't know, there's probably a kind of a racist component there, but they're not hiring Syrian workers. So as a result, the solution to this problem in the eyes of the Turkish corrupt politicians is to introduce a secondary minimum wage, a lower minimum wage just for the Syrian workers, so that there will be an incentive for the Turkish capitalists to hire cheaper Syrian refugees. Plus, they're talking about a there's a universal social security system in Turkey, and they're talking about a secondary, a more inferior social security system in which the employers would be they wouldn't be paying their premiums. So a kind of a boss-friendly, inferior social security system for the Syrians to encourage the employers to hire them. And the workers and their organizations in Turkey are fighting against this. This fight is led by the Confederation of Revolutionary Workers Union. It's a confederation that brings together leftist unions. They raise concerns around these corrupt policies. So let's remember the timeline since 2011. The war in Syria started in 2011. That's when Turkey received the first Syrian refugees. Then the Turkish government had an open door policy. It allowed Syrian refugees in its borders, and it did not send them back to Syria. That was phase number one. Phase number two started around early 2015, and the Turkish government closed the borders, and only allowed the severely injured or severely sick Syrians to its border. And the phase 3 started with the dirty deal that Comrade Nikolas from Greece has mentioned, the dirty deal between Turkey's Erdogan, the president, and the European Union. What was that deal? The deal is for every, the European Union, with that deal, that become active in 2016, early 2016, they're allowed to send refugees back to Turkey. So if people, Syrians are if they manage to get into the European Union land through informal channels, then the EU, according to that law, has the right to send them back to Turkey. And what did Turkey gain from this? Well, it was more like, what's the expression, horse trade. Erdogan said, oh no, $3 billion is not enough, give me, what's the amount there? In total, 6 billion euro. So Turkey will be receiving 6 billion euro from EU as a kind of a payback, or as a cost of this agreeing this dirty deal. And let me remind you, this is a case. Gaddafi, do you remember that corrupt leader of Libya? Gaddafi in 2010 paid a visit to Italy. Then there was that playboy Berlusconi, and they went in front of the cameras and cheered and shook hands. And one of the issues that they spoke about was the North African refugees in Europe. And now I will quote from Gaddafi. He told Europe, give me 4 billion euros per year, I will stop unwanted migrants and prevent Europe from turning black. So his cost was 4 billion euros, Erdogan's cost is 6 billion euros. And we saw what happened to Gaddafi, and I think the worst will be happening to Erdogan, but this time the working class of the world will bring his end. Let me talk about what we can do about the Syrian refugees in Turkey. These are the demands that the progressive working class organizations in Turkey are raising. The first problem is the unemployment problem. Turkish economy is heading towards a crisis. Unemployment is severe. Industrial production is in decline. Trade imbalance is growing and growing. So already the Turkish economy is heading towards a crisis. An increasing number of Syrian refugees in Turkey would mean more severe labor market conditions, in their words, and hence will cause more unemployment. So as a result, we have to find a solution to this, and as socialists, we demand good jobs for all, obviously, and we have to increase, the Turkish government should increase the industrial production in Turkey rather than investing in the corrupt financial sector. More production is needed, and for that, nationalizing the key industries is key, and a nationalized central bank under workers' control is key for that industrial strategy. And of course, working hours can be reduced. Reducing working hours without losing pay would help, will be an alternative to increasing unemployment rate. So as in Canada, in Turkey, the working class organizations say, reduce the number of working hours. This would mean more jobs for all. And secondly, housing, there's a housing crisis in Turkey, especially in the big cities closer to the Syrian borders. The rents are increasing twofold, threefold, and that is causing a backlash from the Turkish or Kurdish residents. They say, oh, now the rents are like 3 times higher. That's because of the Syrian refugees. They're demanding new residences, and they driving the rents higher and higher. Of course, we know that the Syrian refugees are the victims in this scenario, not the perpetrators. But at the same time, there's a housing boom in Turkey. There has been a housing boom fed by the hot money flowing into the country since 2008 crisis. But now, due to declining demand for residential houses in Turkey, there's 1 million excess houses. 1 million. So there are 1 million units which are not being sold. They're empty. So, as a rational person, you can say, oh, there's 1 million houses there, units, and there are many, people who needs housing. So let's move them to those houses. But obviously, your logic will be opposed by the construction sector capitalists in construction sector, as well as the bank owners who provide mortgages, so on and so forth. So although this is a logical solution, providing available housing to Syrians as well as the Turkish citizens, the Turks, the logic, the rational thing, in order to be realized, requires a kind of a social movement and revolutionary upheaval. So, but what was the cause of this influx of this refugee crisis? I will not go into the details. Maybe in the Q&A we can talk more about the war in the Middle East.
3 minutes.
In the last 3 minutes, let me very briefly remind you what the process was like. In 2011, Turkey supported. Turkey was against a solution without Assad, so it militarily and financially supported Free Syrian Army, who was fighting against Assad regime. And when it became clear that Assad was going nowhere, then the Turkish government's second option was to stop the Kurds from gaining more strength, more influence in the region. And as you would know, there's a Kurdish problem in Turkey. Kurds are a people in Turkey, and the Turkish government is at war with Kurds. So they wanted to stop the increasing influence of Kurds in the region. And currently, very recently, the US announced that they would be providing heavy weaponry, arms, not tanks, but technological weapons to Kurds, which is pissing Erdogan off. But maybe he will respond with an increased fight to the Kurds. Why is he doing this? This is related to imperialism. We have to see the big picture. He wants to be the leader of the Sunni camp in the Middle East, and in that Sunni camp there is Saudi Arabia, and of course Israel is supporting that camp against the Shia camp, if you like, led by Iran. So the biggest danger in that region is a possible confrontation between Turkey and Iran. That would be really hell. And let me remind you that in the war between Iraq and Iran, there were like more than 1 million casualties. So a war between Turkey and Iran, or another war in that region that involves Iran, would cause more than 1 million deaths. So what is at stake here? What is the biggest danger? The biggest danger in the region is a possible Middle East war that involves Iran, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, perhaps Israel. That's a reality. Turkey, with its armed forces, are now in Syria with their tanks and with their soldiers on foot. And if we do not provide an alternative, revolutionary answer to that question, that problem, that process, perhaps the Turks would move into Iran. So let me conclude with this. We have to stop the imperialist bastards from ruining the world. And this involves at least two things. This involves at least two things in the context of Turkey and Syria. First of all, if the Turkish working class do not support the Kurdish movement, Kurds, the Kurds would be pushed into the arms of the American imperialism. That's what's going on. Kurds being squeezed by ISIS and other forces are now getting closer and closer to the US imperialism. They're asking for weaponry, so on and so forth. Solution? Have a common struggle with the Kurds and support their national independence movement. And secondly, that's the last sentence that I will say. So against the imperialism, which wants to drive the Middle East into and the people in the Middle East to a Middle East war, we have to support a United States of Iraqis, Turks, Syrians in the region, and I think that should be our demand. Thank you.